He carried the wrong cargo, and the ocean took him. The ocean did not take Jonah Hale all at once. It took him slowly, piece by piece, beginning with his certainty that he was alone. By the time he understood what had awakened inside his ship, it was already too late. If stories like this pull you into the dark, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay until the end, because this one does not let go easily. Jonah Hale had spent 17 years at sea, long enough for the horizon to feel more familiar than land. He worked cargo routes along the American coastline and beyond, hauling sealed containers stacked like steel coffins across thousands of miles of open water. His ship, the North Star Meridian, was not large by modern standards, but it was dependable, heavy, and slow in a way that made sailors trust it. Jonah trusted routine more than luck, and routine had never failed him. This voyage began like any other. The manifest was unremarkable, filled with industrial equipment, consumer goods, and several containers listed under restricted handling classifications. That was normal. Mislabeling happened. Overclassification happened. What mattered was that the containers were sealed, secured, and balanced correctly. Jonah oversaw the final checks personally, moving through the narrow corridors beneath the deck, surrounded by metal walls that hummed faintly with the ship's systems. One container stood out, not because of its markings, but because of its silence. It was smaller than most, wedged between two standard units, with a surface that absorbed light strangely, as if the paint refused reflection. The identification numbers were present but shallow, uneven, as though stamped long after the metal had cooled. Jonah noted it briefly and moved on. At sea, you learn not to dwell on things that didn't affect your job. The North Star Meridian left port just before dusk. By midnight, land was a memory behind them, swallowed by black water and cloudless sky. The ocean was calm, unnervingly so, its surface stretched tight and glossy like a sheet of dark glass. Jonah stood alone on the deck, watching the ship's wake vanish almost immediately, leaving no trace of their passage. The first anomaly occurred at 12:41 a.m. The ship's internal temperature dropped several degrees without explanation. Jonah noticed it while making his rounds below deck, his breath faintly visible in the air despite the climate controls functioning normally. Metal groaned softly as it contracted, the sound traveling through the hull like a distant pulse. He checked the gauges twice. Everything read within acceptable limits. The second anomaly followed minutes later. A vibration rippled through the ship, subtle but wrong. Not the steady rhythm of engines or the slap of water against steel, but something irregular, like a delayed echo. Jonah paused in the corridor, placing a hand against the wall. The vibration returned, stronger this time, localized, coming from the cargo hold where the restricted containers were stored. Jonah descended the ladder slowly, each step ringing louder than it should have. The cargo hold was dim, illuminated by sparse overhead lighting that cast long, rigid shadows between the containers. The air smelled different here. Not oil or rust, but something mineral and stale, like damp stone sealed away for too long. The vibration came again. It originated from the small container. Jonah stood several feet away, heart rate elevated, listening. The container was still. No movement. No sound. And yet the metal floor beneath his boots trembled faintly, responding to something that did not obey the ship's mechanics. Jonah convinced himself it was a resonance issue, a structural quirk triggered by temperature change. He logged the anomaly and left the hold. Sleep did not come easily. Jonah lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the ship's mechanical noises. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the hum of the engines faltered for less than a second, just long enough for silence to settle heavily across the vessel. In that silence, Jonah felt something he had never felt at sea before. Awareness. Not his own. Something else. He sat up slowly, every instinct screaming that movement mattered. The ship resumed its normal rhythm, but the sense of being observed lingered, pressing against his thoughts like an intrusive memory. Jonah did not return to sleep. Over the next day, the ocean changed. The water darkened unnaturally, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The sky remained clear, yet the horizon blurred, as if distance itself had lost definition. Instruments behaved erratically, recalibrating themselves without input. Jonah compensated manually, adjusting course to maintain stability, telling himself that open water played tricks on perception. By nightfall, the ship felt smaller. Corridors seemed longer, corners sharper. Jonah noticed he was avoiding certain routes subconsciously, particularly those that passed near the restricted cargo hold. When he forced himself to walk through that section, the air felt thicker, heavy enough to resist breathing. The vibration returned intermittently, always strongest near the small container, always pulsing in irregular intervals. At midnight, the container made sound. It was not loud. It was not sudden. It was deliberate. A deep internal shift resonated through the steel walls, followed by a low, resonant pressure that Jonah felt behind his eyes rather than in his ears. The ship responded as if adjusting to new weight, creaking softly despite no change in load distribution. Jonah backed away slowly, dread settling into his chest with a weight that felt physical. The container was no longer inert. The ocean responded almost immediately. Waves rose without wind, swelling and collapsing in slow, deliberate motions. The ship rocked gently at first, then with increasing insistence. Jonah returned to the bridge, hands unsteady on the controls, scanning the instruments as they flickered and stabilized repeatedly, unable to hold consistent readings. At 2:17 a.m., the engines stalled. The silence that followed was absolute. In that silence, Jonah understood something fundamental and horrifying. The presence aboard his ship was not reacting to the ocean. The ocean was reacting to it. The water pressed against the hull with unnatural force, not violently, but attentively, as if listening. The vibration surged. Below deck, the container shifted. Not slid. Not tipped. Shifted, as if space around it had briefly failed to hold its shape. Jonah felt it happen through the soles of his boots, a sudden displacement that left his balance unsteady and his vision swimming. The ship's lights dimmed, then returned, casting unfamiliar shadows across the bridge. Jonah did not pray. He did not panic. He stood frozen, staring out at the endless black water, realizing with quiet certainty that whatever had been sealed inside that container was no longer contained by steel. It had been waiting for distance. The ocean stretched infinitely in every direction, and Jonah Hale understood, far too late, that he had carried the wrong cargo into a place where nothing could hear him scream, and nothing would stop what had finally awakened beneath his feet. Jonah Hale remained on the bridge long after the engines died, hands resting on cold steel, eyes fixed on the water that no longer behaved like water. The ocean beneath the North Star Meridian was unnaturally still, its surface smooth and unbroken despite the ship drifting without power. There was no swell, no rhythm. It felt restrained, as though held in place by something beneath it. The ship should have been moving. It was not. Jonah tried restarting the engines manually. The controls responded, lights blinking, systems acknowledging commands, but nothing followed. No vibration. No thrust. It was as if the ship had been disconnected from the concept of motion itself. He checked the radios next. Static filled the channels, dense and heavy, not the scattered interference he was used to, but a continuous wall of sound that pressed into his ears and refused modulation. Below deck, something shifted again. This time, Jonah heard it clearly. A low, internal distortion that traveled through the hull and into his bones, accompanied by a sensation of compression, like the air itself was being drawn inward. He knew without checking where it came from. The small container was no longer merely present. It was active. Jonah descended slowly, each step heavier than the last. The corridors felt narrower now, the walls subtly angled inward. The lighting flickered irregularly, illuminating the cargo hold in brief, disorienting flashes. When the light stabilized, Jonah stopped breathing. The container had changed. Its surface was no longer uniform. The metal rippled faintly, as if responding to internal pressure, bending and reforming without leaving dents. The identification numbers were gone, smoothed away completely. Frost coated the floor around it in a wide circle, spreading outward with deliberate slowness. The vibration intensified, no longer irregular, but rhythmic. Measured. Jonah felt it sync with his heartbeat. He backed away, but the space behind him felt wrong. The distance to the ladder stretched unnaturally, the air thickening with each step. Panic crept in despite his efforts to suppress it. The container emitted a deep internal resonance that bypassed hearing entirely, settling into Jonah's skull and blooming outward into pressure and nausea. Images surfaced in his mind without invitation. Not visions, not memories, but impressions. Depth. Weight. Endless downward motion. A sense of being carried rather than falling. Jonah staggered, gripping a nearby support beam as the ship lurched sharply for the first time since the engines died. The ocean outside responded, waves rising in slow arcs that crashed against the hull without sound. The ship was no longer floating. It was being held. Jonah fled back toward the bridge, lungs burning, heart racing wildly. The corridors twisted subtly as he ran, intersections appearing where none should exist, angles skewed just enough to disorient. The ship's layout no longer obeyed its original design. Space itself seemed compromised, folding inward toward the cargo hold. On the bridge, the windows showed nothing but blackness. No stars. No horizon. The ocean and sky had merged into a single void, broken only by faint distortions in the darkness, like pressure ripples in thick fluid. Jonah realized with chilling clarity that the ship was no longer on a recognizable surface. It was suspended. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the ship tilted forward. Not sharply. Gently. Purposefully. The bow dipped, lowering inch by inch, as though responding to an unseen pull. Jonah grabbed the console to steady himself, watching helplessly as the ocean rose to meet the ship rather than the ship descending into it. Water climbed the hull without splashing, sliding upward in defiance of gravity, clinging to steel as if magnetized. The container below deck resonated violently now. Jonah felt it through the structure, a massive internal shift that reverberated upward, distorting the bridge windows as though pressure were being applied from within the ship itself. The lights exploded overhead, plunging the bridge into darkness lit only by the faint glow of emergency indicators. In that darkness, Jonah felt the presence fully. It was not a ghost. It was not a spirit. It was mass. A consciousness bound to weight and depth, something that belonged to places without light, without surface, without sound. It had been sealed, mislabeled, carried across land and sea by systems that did not recognize what they transported. Distance from shore had not awakened it. Isolation had. The ocean answered because it recognized it. Jonah dropped to his knees as pressure built in his chest, not crushing, but compressing, as though his body were being adapted to a new environment. His ears rang painfully. His vision narrowed. The bridge tilted further, the front windows now filled entirely with water that did not break or flow, but pressed. Below deck, the container ruptured. There was no explosion. No tearing metal. The rupture was silent and absolute, a moment where containment simply ceased to exist. The ship shuddered violently as something displaced reality within its hull, extending outward through steel and into the surrounding water. The ocean convulsed. Waves surged upward, not crashing but folding inward, collapsing toward the ship from all directions. The North Star Meridian groaned under immense strain, its structure bending in ways it was never meant to. Jonah screamed silently as the pressure intensified, his body dragged forward across the bridge floor toward the windows. The water parted. A void opened beneath the ship, a vertical absence that swallowed light and depth alike. Jonah glimpsed it for only a moment, but it was enough. Endless descent. A space that rejected measurement. The ocean did not fall into it. It connected to it. The ship tipped fully forward. Jonah was pulled from the bridge, dragged through shattered glass and into the water without resistance. The ocean did not feel cold. It did not feel wet. It felt dense, compressive, supportive in a way that stripped panic and replaced it with helpless certainty. He was not drowning. He was being taken. The North Star Meridian vanished from the surface without a sound, drawn downward and then released. Moments later, the ocean returned to normal, waves resuming their natural rhythm as if nothing had occurred. When the ship was found days later, it drifted intact. No damage. No signs of struggle. Engines functional. Cargo sealed, except for one container missing entirely. Jonah Hale was gone. No blood. No record. No explanation. The ship floated silently, empty of its only crew member. The ocean kept what recognized it. Somewhere beneath the surface, far beyond light or recovery, something heavier than water continued its descent, carrying with it the man who had unknowingly delivered it home. If this story left you feeling small and unsettled, don't scroll away yet. Subscribe for more dark, true-style horror that crawls under your skin and stays there. Leave a comment with what you think Jonah carried across the ocean, and share this story with someone who trusts the sea too much. Some cargo is never meant to arrive.